Very good evening to everyone who's joining us around the world. Something wonderful about the Jewish people is that we really do feel the pain of not only our immediate selves and family and community, but the pain of the entire Jewish people. Many nations have days of celebrations to celebrate triumphs. We have Pesach, Yom Ha'atzmaut, Chanukah, and Purim. But very few nations besides ourselves have days of national mourning, and bizarrely for an event that none of us were there to witness. None of us were around for the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. None of us were around for the destruction of the second, and none of us knew about the sins of the spies. Yet that pain that sits with the Jews back then sits with us. Being a Jew is feeling the pain of fellow Jews. Whether those Jews are university students, members of Linksfield Shul, Jews living overseas or locally, religious, secular, or any other kind, we share in celebrations and we share in suffering, because that is what it means to be a member of the Jewish people. That is what it means to be a member of this nation. We are privileged tonight to have a panel of courageous speakers from our community who have come forward to tell their stories of adversity and how they overcame that adversity to become stronger people as a result of it. In a year when we have all lost so much, we hope that their words provide some comfort to you all and help us all realize that as dark and difficult as everything might seem at the moment, things can and will get better. We will find comfort in our pain and suffering, and we will all merit a complete redemption and a future filled with hope, light, and comfort. Rabbi, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Each of the speakers tonight are much more than just a story. Originally, when we were thinking of a program to do, I was talking to someone in the community, and we were thinking, should we have a similar format that we had last year with soldiers? And we were worried maybe it's heavy, these kind of speakers, but in truth, I believe that it's these speakers, each and every one of them, who I know personally and whose strength is so visible. It's these speakers that give us strength. As was mentioned, and a big thank you to soldiers and the whole team for putting this program together, for hosting it. On behalf of Linksfield Shul and the executive, a big shkoyach, and a big thank you to the speakers who are having the courage. Each of these speakers has lived through untold pain, and yet they've found meaning and strength to carry on. And that's what we need more than ever. We've come through a long year and a half, and we've come through a very long week here in South Africa. And what I hope is that each of these speakers in their own story, each speaker will talk up to 15, 20 minutes. Each speaker will offer you insight and inspiration and courage to face your own challenges. The first speaker up is Brad, who's a good friend. We didn't know each other till recently, until Brad lost his sister, and got to know Brad, his wonderful parents, grandmother, and the extended family. And Brad faced one of the greatest pains, and that is to lose a sibling. And I have to say, Brad, you could put on your video now, but I'm beyond impressed that you had the courage to come on and share the story, and I look forward to hear your perspective. I hand it over to Brad Milwitsky.
Thank you, Rabbi, and I appreciate the kind words. My sister died on the 14th of March, and I would like to start off by reading her personal essay that she wrote towards the end of her school career. The essay is titled, "Remission is the Cycle of Occurrence." Remission, a temporary diminution of the severity of diseases or pain. The word temporary plays a significant role in my life, as my health conditions are constantly being tested. We are often faced with trials and tribulations in a lifetime. There are many challenges that some of us may encounter, but I am a strong believer that even though sometimes it may feel I have the weight of the world on my shoulders, I will never be given something that I cannot handle. At the age of 8, my ride on the roller coaster of life began. I fell ill, and for precautionary reasons, I was sent by my doctor to get a scan. We discovered that I, Andy Milwitsky, had a liver disease whose liver could be compared to that of a 56-year-old male alcoholic. That's pretty cool. My journey of an uphill climb to unanswered questions and emotional turmoil began. At the time, I was too young to realize what was going on with me. I wasn't aware that my world was about to be tipped upside down, running from one doctor to the next, their vampire needs, draining liters of blood from me. I pumped myself with medication, altering not only my biochemistry, but also my reputation with other kids who viewed me as a drug addict. Yet, this brought out an inner strength in me that I never knew I had. I never wanted to be the sick girl or the one who had to be looked after. My belief is that I was supposed to be taking care of everyone else. I was not living a typical life. I felt as if I was an experiment in a little girl's body. Nobody was giving me definite answers, and my climb felt steeper than ever. The struggle was real, but I was determined to live and be happy no matter what was thrown at me. The abnormal lifestyle became a normality, and slowly I began to understand the routine of taking my medications and all the challenges that would come with it. The mind-altering drugs slowing down my ability to respond normally, eating away the time that I could not be mentally present. The abnormality of my life is something I've learned to gain from, and things began to get easier, or so I thought. I've always been the kind of person who lives on the edge. The twists and turns of my roller coaster ride could never have prepared me for the highest climb I have yet to encounter. High school. I was now just a little part of a massive jungle. Walking into my first day of high school had to be the most nerve-wracking thing. I felt as if I was an ant walking along the ground trying not to be stood on. I went into school and have never felt more negative about myself. I felt as if there was a certain social appearance that had to be met, which unfortunately created a mental block in my mind. I found it hard to accept myself. In time, I overcame my mental block and became to focus on what was important. For the next 2 years, I lived a happy, healthy life and felt unstoppable. I've made memories as I live my life to its fullest. I tell my friends who worry so much that I have a double life. I live as a happy, healthy individual with no worries, whilst the inside of my body is in the hands of the doctors. It's a bit like the mechanic fixing the broken switches on the roller coaster. No sooner had I thought I was on the road to recovery, I received disappointing results from my blood tests, whereby I was informed that a so-called urgent liver biopsy had to be performed. A supposedly simple standard procedure turned out to be one of my biggest nightmares. I came face to face with an 18-centimeter needle that was plunged directly into my right side to obtain a piece of my liver. As it went through, I felt the needle piercing through my flesh. The pain was excruciating, and I could feel the internal damage that was being done to me. I couldn't breathe, and I've never felt so hopeless in my life. I was begging and pleading for assistance to manage the pain, and I felt suffocated. I wondered if I would get through this alive. They rushed to me with oxygen, pumped me with pethidine, numbing every limb in my body. I was then wheeled to high care, where I had many hours to lie in pain, thinking how I was going to move forward in my life. The decision I came to is that I'm sick and tired of being a guinea pig at the hand of my team of doctors. As I come to the ending of my school career, I have come to accept that remission is just a cycle of occurrence, and nothing is ever thrown at me that I cannot handle. Believe in yourself and all that you are. Know that there is something inside of you that is greater than any obstacle. I am ready to face any bump in the road ahead because my life will be made of never-ending cycles of happiness, hope, and determination whilst living in remission. However, her story continued with more uncertainty and struggle. As a family, we decided at that point that some people are born with a bad liver, and it was time for Andy to live. And live she did. In January 2021, Andy's liver took a turn for the worse. But at all times, Andy was the light. She was the one who always kept a positive outlook on her situation. Never once did she say, "Why me?" or feel sorry for herself. 2 days before arriving in Cape Town, Andy was given the go-ahead to fly. Andy's journey concluded with my family arriving in Cape Town. Andy had every intention of coming to live with me, studying law, and beginning the next chapter of our lives as roomies. Shortly after arriving, Andy was admitted to the UCT private hospital. 5 days after being admitted into UCT, we lost her. I was robbed of the time we should have had. There are so many emotions that runs through a person's head, and the processing of these emotions is extremely difficult. And it took me back to the age of 12, when my story as a worried big brother began, attempting to balance the harshness of reality as well as achieving my own success. It began on a night that seemed as normal as any other. As a family, we had known of Andy's liver condition, but at my young age, I was unable to fully understand the extent of that issue. It was a quiet night. We had eaten dinner together as a family, as we always have. This time we spent as a family around the dinner table every single night, without the distractions of our cell phones or TV, is something I will look back on and always be grateful for. We had finished our dinner and decided it was time for bed. I woke up that night to a scream from my mom from my sister's bedroom. I walked into the room and saw Andy in a state that has haunted me for many years. This was the first of 4 seizures. It changed our lives so drastically. One of us was always on watch to ensure that Andy was okay. I learned to drive at the age of 13 because my father often worked nights and my mom was not in a state of mind to be able to get her to the hospital. I, as Andy's brother, needed to know that I'd be able to be the person that could take responsibility in any situation. It was from this point that I became very protective of my sister in all aspects of her life. She was always my best friend and partner in crime. To Andy, I was a role model. I was the first point of call and the first person she came to in times of need. I have grown up with a passion for sports and academics. I gained an extreme sense of drive for success, and through my challenges, I was able to find the ability to push harder than I ever thought possible. At this point in my life, my parents were consumed with Andy's health, which I never begrudged, but I've always been so grateful for what my parents have done to ensure that my sister was cared for as best as possible, regardless of the outcome or the unrelenting challenges she faced. It was because of this I never wanted to be an additional burden unto them. And so I always made sure that everything I did was to the best of my ability. I have found throughout my life that sports and physical activity was the escape. It was the hours of the day that an immense amount of energy was put into something, and it allowed my mind to focus on a specific activity. I have always been goal-driven, and my parents allowed me and Andy to follow any dream we had. I finished school and decided I was going to move to Cape Town and study at UCT. I did not know many people at the time of my move, but what I did know is that it would be a massive growing and learning experience. It was a very difficult decision leaving my parents and sister behind, but thank God for FaceTime. I never lost the connection I had with my family and sister and realized the truth of the statement. Distance teaches us to appreciate the days we are apart. In my second year of studying, the COVID-19 pandemic began. As we all know, there was a nationwide lockdown. My parents rushed me home and spent the next 4 months in Joburg. I was so upset that I was missing out on time at university and all the experiences that come with it. But looking back today, it was such a blessing. It was an extra 4 months we spent as a family, treasured nights around the dinner table, endless conversations, laughs, and incredible memories. My relationship with my sister was by no means always peaceful. We certainly had our moments. Andy was extremely wild and energetic, as well as mischievous and naughty, which at times clashed with my more introverted nature. One thing Andy was more than persistent on was that no one was allowed to go to sleep angry. All arguments and disagreements had to be sorted and spoken through before the night was over. She was someone who had an amazing gift with words, whether it be spoken or written. I completed my second year in Cape Town, and I have made incredible friendships, formed lifetime bonds, and become part of the Cape Town community. Third year was about to begin, and Andy arrived in style, as always, with an endless amount of clothes which took up her cupboards as well as half of mine. I was not fully aware of how ill Andy was. My mom had told me about Andy's recent decline in health and that the last 3 months had been beyond difficult. Andy was determined to start this next chapter. None of us were entirely aware of how ill Andy really was and the pain she had hidden so well. I will never forget that Wednesday morning. Andy had turned yellow overnight. Andy was rushed to hospital, where there was a full team of doctors, including the top liver specialist in South Africa, waiting for her. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would see the strongest person I knew in this state. By the time I was allowed to see Andy, she was already in ICU and only semi-conscious. I sat next to her, pleading with her to fight. She had to. I begged her. We needed her to be okay, but it wasn't the case. The last words I ever heard from Andy was a struggled, "I love you." Those were the last words she ever said. I love you. The most powerful statement that exists. This shows how Andy lived her life, with a pure love and care for everyone, without judgment. There was an immense outpour of support from our community and those close to us. We had friends fly down, spending days and nights sitting in cars outside the hospital. Hundreds of people praying from all around the world. Rabbi Avzon had organized that the local Catonian rabbi come and say Tehillim with us all, in the rain, outside the hospital. The Jewish community is one like no other. I am disappointed that it took me losing my sister for me to realize and truly appreciate the power of our community. The hardest thing I've ever had to do was say goodbye. In the days and weeks that followed, I found talking has helped me process the grief that I'll be carrying with me forever. The first conversation I had after Andy's passing was with Rabbi Avzon. It was the first bit of comfort I found. Since then, the grieving process is unrelenting. I was always the person to never believe in therapy, and at my mom's insistence, I agreed to go see someone once. The person I chose to see, I did so because he had been through a similar situation. I arrived at his building and instantly knew I was meant to be there, as his room number was my birthday. It was an extremely weird feeling. To this day, I find that this time has been more hopeful than I had ever imagined, and I've continued therapy regularly. From a young age, I have made use of different methods in order to manage the emotions that come with the given circumstances. These methods were all used to help me train my mind to maintain focus on a specific activity. One trouble I've always had was the ability to fall asleep. From my early years in high school, I have listened to a podcast called The Joe Rogan Experience in order to help me calm my mind and allow me to fall asleep. Through this, I gained an intense passion for podcasting and productive conversations. I've always dreamed of having a successful podcast, but I've never had a reason to start my own one. This year has been extremely difficult, and through Andy's passing, I found the motivation and cause to start my own podcast. I am using the podcast as a platform to speak to successful people and gain their knowledge on how to overcome adversity. I named the podcast The Human Element, as the human body and mind is exceptionally complex, and in order to live a life that we are all proud of, it is imperative that we gain knowledge from other people. My hope for the podcast is that I am able to influence someone in a positive way and potentially provide insight as to how I have dealt with my circumstances. For anyone that is interested, the podcasts are uploaded to YouTube under the Human Element podcast. As I've said before, I have a deep love for sports and physical activity. A sport that I'm especially passionate about is mixed martial arts. I have found that the exertion of energy through punching and kicking in a controlled environment is an extraordinary way to offload the tension and stress that all of us experience. I have a great appreciation for the different techniques and find great satisfaction when I'm able to implement these techniques in a more realistic scenario. There are many ways to manage our challenges, but the most important and impactful one is a good support system. There is nothing in this world that is more important to me than family. I feel that it is essential to treat those around you with great love, respect, and loyalty. We, as a family, have always been stronger together, and I'm so grateful for a family like this one. Grief never ends, but it changes. It's a passage, not a place to stay. Grief is not a sign of weakness, nor a lack of faith. It is the price of love.
Shkoyach, Brad, that was amazing and very courageous. And I look forward to listen to the podcast. And a special shout out to your parents for their strength and wishing them on this very difficult journey. And you're right, grief is definitely the price of love. And the more you love, the deeper the grief, which is one of the sad ironies of life. Brad spoke about losing a sister, and we're now going to ask Lori to talk about losing a brother. I know that's a terrible, lead on to the next topic, but Lori lost her brother Adam. And I remember listening to when your mother spoke, I think it was for the Mizrahi community about a year ago, and you were sitting next to her, and I just was blown away by the strength of all of you. And I look forward to hear your thoughts, Lori.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, and thank you so much for letting me be a part of this talk. I mean, I've never heard Brad speak before, and it's certainly not a club that you want to be a part of. having lost a sibling, but I'm very emotional from hearing you speak, and just thank you so much for sharing, because I know how overwhelming and how painful it can be. My story, I don't like to plan often what I'm going to say, so please just bear with me. I hope it makes sense, and I hope that somehow I'm able to touch somebody, and I hope something that I say helps anyone, because I think that right now, as South Africans and as a Jewish community, we all need a bit of help, and we all need a little bit of love. So when I was 11, I had my first experience with therapy. I had just lost my aunt to anorexia. My parents were getting a divorce, and my mom was in the throes of alcoholism. I had already spent a lot of time at the school social worker, Jenny Gobert. If you're there, pretty sure you saved my life, so thank you. And my parents, in the middle of these 3 simultaneous crises, decided that me and my brothers had to go for therapy. And they took us, literally kicking and screaming, to therapy. They took us, we didn't exactly have the financial means at the time, and they took us to the Chev. And I started my journey with therapy. I do not remember my therapist's name. I do not remember who she was. I know I was probably a revolting patient, because I didn't want to be there. I hated every second of it. And I think at that point in time, at the brilliant, emotionally mature age of 11 years old, I decided that I was going to handle every issue that I had for the rest of my life on my own, without the help of anyone else, without the help of therapists, without the help of medication, and I was going to be okay. It didn't matter that my mom was an alcoholic, and it didn't matter that my parents were divorced, and it didn't matter that I didn't have money, and it didn't matter that I had crippling anxiety. I didn't need help. And my life wasn't necessarily what one would describe as easy or simple or happy, but I don't think anyone's lives ever are really that simple or easy. And I decided that I didn't want my adversity to define me. So as much as I could, I acted like nothing was wrong. And I put a smile on my face, and some days were hard and some days were difficult, but I went on with it. That was my life. I put as my mom likes to say, I buried my head in the sand, and I acted like I was okay. One of my very vivid memories as a child that my mom loves to talk about is the one day I was little, I was young, I was in the bath, and I turned around to my mom and I said, "Mom, why can't you be normal like," I think I said, "Mrs. Cohen," because all I wanted was my mom to be normal. And I desperately wanted a normal life. I desperately wanted to just be like all my friends. I didn't always understand why I couldn't be, but again, as I grew up, I decided that that was just the way it was, and I was going to be okay, and I was going to be fine. And I was okay. I really, really was. I mean, for the most part, yes, I had crippling anxiety to the extent that I would often be in the car and I would be scared that like a street light was going to fall onto the car. And I went through school spending, as I said, a huge amount of time in social workers' offices. So Jenny Gobert, Meryl Melkin, you got me through school. Thank you so much. I remember sitting in Meryl Melkin's office like before my maths exams, literally physically shaking, on the verge of fainting, clutching a rescue bottle as if it was like the last oxygen on earth. But to me, that was okay. To me, that was me being fine. And to me, that was just the way that I was. Now I sometimes look back and I realize that maybe that wasn't necessarily that normal, and maybe there were cries for help within that. But my life was good, and my life was okay, and I was incredibly happy, and I was incredibly fulfilled. And despite my anxiety and despite my obsessive need to please and overachieve, I threw myself into life, and I was able to create a really, really beautiful life for myself. I was in my last few years of high school, I did everything. I was in every club, every sport, you name it, I did it, and I loved it. And then I finished school and I embraced B'nai Akiva with that same love and that same passion, and I threw my heart and my soul into it, and I found so much peace and joy and serenity, I guess the word is, through religion. And I was in an incredibly good place, despite my anxiety and despite the fact that I would go through phases where I just wouldn't sleep, or I wouldn't eat, or I would eat too much, or whatever it was, but I was okay and I was happy. And then I met my husband, and in 2019, he asked me to marry him, and I was so happy. And in September, we had the most perfect wedding that I could have ever asked for. One of the hardest realities of my life now is that I know that my wedding day will forever be the happiest day of my life, because 2 weeks later, my brother had his car accident, and every moment of joy that I experience from then will always be tarnished by the knowledge that Adam isn't here. And I know that I will have so many more moments of joy. Of course I will. I will, please God, have children, and I will have a laugh, and I will have family events to celebrate, and I know that I will have joy. But my wedding day will always be the day that I had Adam. And it was perfect. And there was a moment towards the end of the wedding where Adam came up to me, and he just felt this obsessive need to tell me that he loved me. Like, we were trying to leave the wedding, we were trying to go, and he just kept going, but I just need to tell you that I love you, and I love you, and I love you. And my friends were like trying to get me to leave, and I was trying to leave. And my God, if I knew what I know now, I would have spent so much longer in that moment. But I am so grateful for that moment, and I will forever be so grateful for that moment. But as I said, my life continued. That's what life does, it continues. And Adam had his accident, and the only way that I can describe the next few weeks is a complete and utter blur. I don't remember dates, I don't remember times. I often will share memories of that time and get them confused, and someone will need to correct me because it was one giant blur. But what I do know is that my family and I were completely and utterly enveloped, held, and nurtured by the community. And I know without a shadow of a doubt that the community saved us. They are the reason that we are still standing. They fed us, they held us, they dried our tears, they prayed with us, they literally saved us. And I know Brad mentioned it too, but this community is the greatest gift that we have. And I know right now, like, sometimes looking at South Africa can be hard and challenging and not exactly a beautiful thing to look at. But if you have ever gone through a tragedy as a South African Jew, you know how lucky you are to be here, and you are here for a reason. Anyway, my coping mechanism very much continued in the same way as it had for most of my life. And I refused therapy. I refused medication. I did not speak to a single person after Adam died. I completely and utterly refused. My brother went for therapy. My mom went for therapy. And I threw myself into helping everyone else. And I wanted to make sure my mom was okay. And I wanted to make sure my dad was okay. And I wanted to make sure my friends were okay. And my students were okay. One of my biggest issues was that my students were so damaged by everything that I had gone through. Like, that was genuinely my biggest concern. And I kept going and I kept pushing, and I was okay, as I said. And finally, the beginning of this year, my family started to notice that I actually wasn't that okay. I was either not sleeping at all or sleeping all the time. I was either not eating at all or eating a fortune. I was in a really, really, really bad way. And one of the biggest things is that I started to get really grumpy and snappy. And my poor husband, who I always say is a saint, was putting up with my terrible moods and my lashing out. And my students, for the first time, I'd always been this teacher that didn't shout and didn't scream and didn't get irritated. And a kid would look at me the wrong way and I would literally like start shouting at them. And I stopped recognizing myself. And my mom turned around to me and she said to me, Law, you're just not okay. You're not yourself anymore and you've lost yourself. And through her own pain and through her own hardship, she was able to guide me to therapy. And I found the most unbelievable therapist. A year and a half after my brother died was the first time that I went for therapy. And I was diagnosed with anxiety, which obviously I already knew that I had and suffered from quite badly. And what I didn't realize was that I was actually suffering from quite severe depression, which is how it explained all my behaviors. And I realized that I was so desperate to not let my tragedy and my adversity become my identity that as a result, I ignored it. And I was so determined to not let it be who I was that I instead let it become a deep, dark, festering wound in my soul. And we all know what happens. It sounds like a cliche, but you know what happens when you leave a wound untreated. It doesn't get better. It doesn't heal on its own. And it turned into depression and it turned into a part of me. And I lost myself through my pain. And I've realized now that even though I'm not my adversity, I have to acknowledge it too. And one of my biggest struggles is that I love to say, like, everyone has pain. I don't know a single person in the world. As much as when I was little, I used to tell my mom that I wanted her to be normal and I wanted my life to be normal. I don't know a normal person. And I don't know a person who doesn't have pain. And I don't know a person who doesn't have suffering and hardship and things that make them sad and hurt them. We all have adversity, every single one of us. So mine might look like my brother dying. Someone else's might be failing an exam. And someone else's could just be they want it to be sunny, but instead it rained. It doesn't matter. We all have our pain and we all have our suffering, and mine might look really bad to someone else. And to another person, they might be jealous of my life because I've got a roof over my head and a family who adore me. And I'm so lucky for that. So I think the message that I'm trying to convey is that I'm not my adversity. None of us are our adversity. It's not our identity. And for a very long time, I felt like I was walking around with a giant poster on my forehead saying, yeah, my brother died, or girl with dead brother, because I felt like that's how people saw me. And as I've worked through it, I've realized that I am the girl who lost her brother. I am. But I'm also the teacher who loves and adores her students and wakes up every day excited for her job. And I realized that, yes, I am the girl whose mom is a recovering alcoholic who threw me across the room by my hair into the wall once. But I'm also the person who loves and adores and looks to her mother for support in literally every single aspect of her life. And I know that I'm also the girl whose parents got divorced when she was really young. But I'm a friend, and I am a daughter-in-law, and I'm a cousin, and I am a teacher, and I'm so much more than the pain that I've been through. And there are days when I am so angry with God, and I can barely bring myself to daven, and the words I have to say in Hebrew because saying them in English is physically painful. But I also am the girl who believes in God 110%. And I am a product of my community, and I'm forever grateful for that. So yes, I've had a little bit of a hard time. And yes, I've had quite a bit of adversity in my life, but that adversity isn't who I am. I am more than my adversity. And our adversity, it's wounds, and all wounds need to be treated. And to treat it, you have to acknowledge it. But once you've acknowledged it, you can heal and you can get better. And there are so many people listening tonight who saved me. And if I didn't mention you by name, thank you anyway, because you did save me. And I will forever, forever be grateful to everyone who allowed me to literally overcome my adversity. So thank you so much.
Wow, wow, wow. Gosh, Lori, that was courageous. Brad, that was courageous. I came into the program tonight thinking I know what I'm going to hear, and not, wow. And I just want to sit for one moment on the acknowledgement that you said about acknowledging our struggle, but not identifying at it. There's still a stigma out there in this town on mental health and owning up and saying, I have a problem. And from all the things that Lori spoke about, I would encourage those of us who struggle with, and maybe you don't think you struggle, but if everyone around you is telling you you struggle, chances are you are, to take ownership on it. It's not weakness, it's courage. And it's the only road to heal. It's not a panel tonight on mental health, but I could not use the opportunity to skip over and not make sure that we acknowledge it. The next speaker is in a totally different direction. I only met Callie less than 2 weeks ago. And believe it or not, I didn't know of you till then. I just knew a little bit about your son, Gadi. And yet in the last 2 weeks after you lost your uncle, it was like a second father, Alan. I've gotten to know you, gotten to know the extended family, and amidst this pain, the family just got up from Shiva less than a week ago. You agreed to share your story, and I appreciate it. This is a story of hope, and it's a story of miracles, and I hope that it will inspire us all. Callie, please turn on your screen and unmute. Sorry, just need to unmute.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm very grateful to be on this panel tonight, and very grateful to you for everything that you have done for my family and I, and the way that you've held us up together through this very difficult time. As Rabbi said, we lost my uncle, just over a week ago, and it's been very difficult as Alan is like a father to me. But my story today is it's twofold. It's about my son's journey and my journey, which ultimately is the same journey, but there's two parts of it. My husband and I lived in Cape Town. We moved there in 2017, I think, and we had an awesome life. We were really happy. It's where we wanted to be. And on the 2nd of January 2019, I had my son. He was born healthy, happy, just everything was amazing. And 8 days later, we had his bris. And after his bris, he didn't stop bleeding. The Mohel came to the house and tried to stop the bleed, told us everything will be okay. And I'm a medic, so I kind of understand what too much blood loss is. And eventually I kicked the rabbi out of my house and flew Gadi to Cape Town Mediclinic. He still hadn't stopped bleeding. And they had to get a surgeon in to come and put hemostatic dressings on and to try and do everything they can, and they couldn't. Gadi was put onto oxygen and put into the NICU for the night, and we weren't sure if he was going to live. The next morning, the doctor informed us that Gadi had something called hemophilia, which is a bleeding disorder, and that he had diffuse brain injury from losing so much blood, and then your brain doesn't get enough oxygen. So our story then carried on the Thursday night. We had to change Gadi's name, added Chaim to the name. And on Thursday night as well, they decided they had to move him to Vincent Pallotti Hospital, as their NICU was better equipped with better doctors for trauma. Gadi was ventilated, and we are also very grateful to the Cape Town community. We had a lot of people behind us, and they needed, in order to transport somebody who's ventilated, you need an ICU ambulance. And there wasn't one on the road with Neke, and then we didn't know what we were going to do. And from working as a medic in Cape Town, one of the regional managers of Neke organized us to mobilize her paramedic. He was off shift, and get the ICU bus and come and transport Gadi to Vincent Pallotti. This whole process took about 2 hours, 3 hours, who knows. He eventually arrived at Vincent Pallotti, and he was having seizures. He was, in a coma, which was also with a lot of meds that he was on. He was being kept alive by the ventilator. And we kind of moved into Vincent Pallotti. We had Shabbos in their waiting room. We took over with 18 people and having Shabbos in the waiting room. And my whole family was around, and we were praying for miracles. There were Tehillim groups, there were mitzvahs being done. There were just people who had never said Tehillim before. Robertson Thurgood in Cape Town had never ever said Tehillim before. And she said that Gadi's the reason she started saying Tehillim. Then on the Sunday morning, the doctors came to us and they said that we need to say goodbye to Gadi. He wasn't going to make it, and we just needed to say goodbye. And Dean and I went down, and for the first time since this had all happened, we were allowed to hold him. And we held him, and we spent time with him, and we told him, we gave him permission to go, and that he needed to be where he needed to be, and if his soul had fulfilled its purpose on the earth, then he needed to go. And we didn't want our last memory of him to be of him dead. And our pediatrician, who is actually a very good friend of ours today, said she'll sit with him until he goes and he won't be alone. And a couple of hours later, I messaged her to be like, well, you know what's happening? And she said his vitals have started to stabilize. The next day, the doctors still informed us that, there was no brain activity. He was on an EEG machine. There was no brain activity. It was below zero. He was being kept alive by the ventilator, but his blood pressure and heart rate had started stabilizing. And obviously the doctors don't really understand halakha and Judaism, and they told us that they think we should turn off the machines. And thank God for halakha and Rabbi Fox and Dean Gerson and all the people who are on the committee, but we couldn't turn off the machines. And 4 days later, Gadi extubated himself, and he was breathing with the assistance, with the CPAP and a BiPAP, but Gadi was alive, and there was limited brain activity still, but there was something, and something was starting. He was still having a lot of seizures, constant seizures, and we were grateful, but we didn't really want to become excited about anything. And over the next few weeks, Gadi just started thriving. He started putting on weight. Unfortunately, he couldn't eat or drink. He lost his sucking reflex. So he had to be first fed by an oral gastric tube, which is a tube down your mouth, which they feed you through. And later on, he had to have something called a peg put in, which is a feeding tube through his stomach. After 6 weeks in the NICU and him just having the operation, we were told we can come home. We then went to go see Gadi's neurologist, who told us that Gadi would never amount to anything. They said he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't smile, he wouldn't talk, he wouldn't walk. He just basically would be a vegetable, and that's what we need to expect. And that was like, for me, I felt, well, why did he survive? If that's what he's going to be, why, what's the reason for him surviving? And, you know, when Gadi was in hospital, I go into crisis mode. I care for everyone. I make sure everyone's fed. I like tell the jokes. I keep everyone okay. And then Gadi came out of hospital, and I just couldn't understand why I wasn't okay. My anxiety was so bad. My mom was there in Cape Town, and I did nothing. I turned around to my mom and I said, I feel like a caregiver, and that she had looked after Gadi for that whole time that she was there. And slowly I started to recognize signs in me that I wasn't okay. And I went to the psychiatrist, and he put me on meds, and they did nothing. And things got really, really bad. My anxiety was so bad that I couldn't walk down my flight of stairs in Cape Town, because what happens if I fell? And I froze on top of the stairs. And everyone suggested I go to a Kiso clinic, and I needed help. And I didn't want to leave Cape Town, but my mom couldn't come to Cape Town for 3 weeks. She had to work, and someone had to look after Gadi. Dean's work was amazing, and they had given him months off. And so I came to Joburg. I didn't say goodbye to Cape Town because I was going back. And I didn't say goodbye to my animals because I was going back. And I was admitted to a Kiso. When I was there, a Kiso felt like I would have rather been in jail. A Kiso felt like, what am I doing here? I'm an occupational therapist. I know what these groups are about. Like, just give me medicine, do what you have to do, and get me out of here. And I didn't go to half my groups. And if I did, I doodled on my page. And my first few therapists, when I arrived in a Kiso, made my life hell. And eventually I got the right psychiatrist who put me on track, and who just kept, and psychiatrists and psychologists who just kept me going. In hindsight, a Kiso was amazing. I had to have electroconvulsive therapy, which is an induced seizure, to try and kind of re-alter my brain and reset my brain, because I was so depressed and I was so anxious that I was 100% dysfunctional human being. After I came back from a Kiso, I thought things were going to be different. You know, great, I'm healed. And I got back and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't look at Gadi. I couldn't talk to Gadi. I believed he was still going to be a vegetable. He started to smile, and my mom would say, look, he's smiling. And I'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. This is a reflex. He's not smiling. I couldn't see it. I remember absolutely nothing from the time Gadi came out of a Kiso until the 1st of September, which I'll tell you about now. When Gadi was 6 months, I decided I'm going to try and give him solids, and we went to speech therapist, and Gadi started eating solids, and he could swallow, and he wasn't choking, and he only had to have his milk through his feeding tube. And this was clinical. I couldn't hold Gadi in my arms. He lay on my lap. We held a tube. It was revolting. And I worked on clockwork. I didn't want to get up in the morning. And when my alarm went off at 3 o'clock in the morning to have to get up to give Gadi a peg feed, I wanted to crawl into a ball and die. this stage, my husband was still in Cape Town. He was packing up. We realized we had to move back. We didn't have immediate family in Cape Town. We really needed their help, especially that when I was in Akiso, my mother single-handedly looked after my 5-month-old baby, and my brother, and I mean the rest of my family. But my mother single-handedly brought up Gadi. And then on the 31st of August, I decided I'm done with this feeding tube. I'm done. I cannot do this anymore. And I decided that the next morning I will not use it. If Gadi gets hungry, he'll drink. If he doesn't, he won't drink. But I can't go on like this anymore. And Gadi started to drink. And slowly Gadi started to do things that the therapist and doctors said he would never do. And 2019 came. I was really on the right meds. I was so grateful for my therapist and for my family keeping me going. And 2020 came. At the end of 2019, Gadi was admitted to hospital. I don't know, maybe we were in hospital for 4 months. His seizures were really bad. They couldn't get them under control. And it was hectic. It was really hectic, especially having been out of Akiso and still trying to deal with my anxiety and being locked up in a hospital with him, not being able to leave. And then 2020 came, and I wasn't in South Africa for his birthday and the date of his birth and all the anniversaries. It was really hard. I was in Australia. It was my half sister's wedding, and I broke down, but we were busy and it was really difficult, and I kind of just pushed it aside and carried on. And then we came back and lockdown happened, and things were tough. Things were really tough. Gadi had to stop therapies. My anxiety got really bad again, and I didn't really know, where to put myself. My husband was working from home, but my day was literally a caregiver, a house cleaner. Gadi was 24/7. And I got to spend a lot of time with Gadi, and slowly he started doing things also that the doctor said he would never do. His eyesight had gone from being cortically blind to having the eyesight of a normal child, a little bit affected, but of a typical child. Gadi, in this time that I spent with Gadi, we spent a lot of time in the garden and just being us, not running to work and running to therapies. And Gadi started to lift his head, and Gadi started to try to crawl. He started to try to sit, and he started doing things more and more that, like, the therapists and the doctors could not believe what they were seeing. Gadi was also diagnosed with a heart condition, which is lifelong, it's forever. And the one day, it was actually in January this year, Gadi went for his follow-up with a cardiologist, and the cardiologist turned around and said, I have no medical explanation, but Gadi's heart condition has disappeared. It's not there, it doesn't exist, he's got the heart of a typical child. And more on my story, at the beginning of this year, when it was Gadi's birthday and the time coming up, I acknowledged and I recognized that I wasn't going to be okay. It was the first time I'm going to be home and with my family, and also we were still in lockdown, and we weren't seeing our family because Gadi's high risk. And I phoned my psychiatrist and I was like, you have to give me something because I need help during this time. And she was really, both her and my psychologist were really relieved that I was able to acknowledge and have the foresight to say that I need help. And I took the medicine, and I felt for the first time that I could actually think clearly. It was the first time I was able to play some memories of the hospital and things in my head. I still don't have memories of Gadi from when he was 7 weeks old until he was 9 months old. I have no memory of that. But I started remembering things that happened in the hospital, and kind of looking down and watching this movie play out in front of me. And it was, I was able to write things down, and it really was cathartic. And I wrote about, that and how I felt and my feelings in the upcoming days, and quotes that had popped up on my Facebook, and things just were so much clearer. My anxiety was so much less. I was able to focus and concentrate. And in 2020, it was also really hard for me. I couldn't work. I'm an OT, and we were in lockdown. I couldn't work. There was nothing I could do. And after all of this started happening, in January with the new medication, things started to fall into place for me. I happened to speak to my friend one day and say, how's work? And she said she's so hectic, she doesn't know what to do. And I said, well, I'm bored. Like, hello. And everyone, you think they feel sorry for you. So, well, maybe I have something for you. Let's be in touch. And the very next day, she phoned me and said, when can you start? So I started being able to work. And we brought our nanny back for the first time, and I had help, and I could take my mind off things and use my brain, and know it wasn't in OT. And I don't know if I'd ever go back into OT. I kind of feel that I have enough of my own child to manage and to therapy with and look after, that I don't know if I have the capacity to look after anybody else's, or to assist anybody else's child. And slowly, I've been able to build up in my company. I've been able to grow and really thrive, and gotten a promotion for only being there in 3 months. And Gadi continues to surprise the doctors every single day. And he is a fighter. If you tell Gadi he can't do something, it's actually the best thing you can tell him, because he says, watch me, and he does it. He is the sweetest little boy with the biggest smile, and he has taught me the meaning of strength and the meaning of never giving up as hard as things become. Like, I cannot give up, because how can I give up when Gadi's fought so hard for everything that he's achieved and everything that he continues to achieve? And every single doctor calls him a scientific miracle. And in fact, we actually had his genetics tested to see where his mutation was. And his tests had to be sent to Finland because he didn't have a common mutation. And we got the results that Gadi had a mutation that was so rare that he's the second documented case in the world. So he's an anomaly, and he just, but it doesn't stop him, and it doesn't hinder his progress. And Gadi has and will achieve amazing things to come. Then obviously with the new waves and things, I became anxious again. And for me, how I'm dealing with all of this and how I have is to be aware of the changes in my feelings and the changes in my behaviors, and the feeling that I really don't want to get out of bed today, and to take a step and to do something about it. Speak to my psychologist, who I know I can phone 24 hours a day, and I know you're listening, and speak to my psychiatrist and say, well, I'm feeling this, I think I need to increase this med, and to have a mental illness and to have depression and anxiety or postnatal depression, when it's more normal than people think and want to think. And for people who are suffering with anxiety or anything that doesn't make them feel like themselves, it's okay to get help, and it's okay not to be okay. If you can acknowledge it and get help, you will realize that you don't have to live your life suffering. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and days may be hard, and it's okay. Everybody has a hard day. Just because your anxiety is worse today, everybody has something. But to you, your problem is, or what you're going through is the biggest thing for you. You don't have to compare it to anybody else and say, well, look what you're going through. This is your stuff. This is the biggest and the most heavy thing in your life. And it's okay. But it's also okay to get help. And, you know, just going on what was said just now about adversity, and we all face adversity throughout our lives. And, you know, currently now my family is facing adversity. My uncle tragically passed away 2 weeks ago. My grandpa 2 days later fell down the stairs, cracked his head open, and is lying in a coma in hospital. But our family are so strong, and my family were there for me through everything, that it just shows me that with the right support, my family, the rabbi, my husband, Gadi, and everybody else who has played such a huge part in mine and Gadi's life and helping me mold me and to be who I am today. A huge thank you. And please, if you need to reach out and talk about your anything, I'm available and more than willing to talk to anybody.
Can I say wow, wow, wow again? Kelly, I think I fell into the trap of myself. You know, I was talking about mental health, and then I said, we're going to now move on to a different topic, because spending time with you, I would never have realized. But the truth is, we never realize it. And for me, that's another reminder how, on the same topic, face your challenges. Or on Tisha B'Av today, we acknowledge that life's full of challenges. And a year and a half of COVID has definitely pushed many of our anxiety to the next level. Acknowledge it. And Callie, thank you for that courageous telling of your story and of Gadi's story. Amazing. The final speaker for tonight, which is definitely a highlight, is Karen Marcus, therapist. You know, we've been hearing for the last three speakers the importance of therapy. So I think, Karen, you have your speech ready out for you. And Karen, a personal thank you for the incredible strength that you offer so many people in times of adversity. Have you taken your own pain and made the world a better place through it? So without further ado, thank you so much, Karen. Look forward to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for everybody who's joined in tonight. And really to just say to the panelists, to Brad, to Kelly, to Laurie, I have absolute, I applaud your courage tonight. It's never easy sharing one story, and to share it on a platform like this takes the most incredible courage, and I really applaud that. Brad, keep your podcast going. We need it. We need a place to connect in grief. There's an incredible collective grief, and we've never felt it so much at the moment in this country. A collective grief, a collective trauma, a collective hope. Keep your podcast going. Thank you. To Laurie, thank you for your honesty. Yes, I hope people don't see the HOLE, the whole, but they see the WHOLE, the bigger picture, all of you. Absolutely. And when you speak of being 11 and sitting in therapy and being probably not the best patient, I think I was that child too after my father passed away very suddenly in a plane crash. I don't think I was either a great patient at the age of 11. And now as a therapist, I sit here and I see that child in front of me, and we walk that journey together. We walk that journey together. So thank you, Laurie. And Kelly, thank you. Thank you for just being so honest, and for such strength and such courage. And may Gadi continue just to shine and to grow and to continue being your teacher. I think what all the stories really reflect is how in our most vulnerable moments, we find our greatest strength. And I hope that through tonight and through the short time that we have and that I have to really discuss adversity and suffering and trauma and hope and growth, that I'm able to take I sat with the topic, and my mind just went to a million places. There is so much that I wanted to share this evening, so I've had to really refine it to a few concepts, and I hope I do it justice. I hope I do it justice. I just want to say again to the three panelists who spoke that what you really represent are evidence of life after adversity, and not just surviving adversity, but really living meaningful lives post your suffering and your trauma and your adversity. We need those lighthouses right now. Walking in the work that I do, which is a lot in the bereavement space and in the grief space, so often people at the moment of adversity and loss go, Corinne, I don't know how I'm ever going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to wake up tomorrow. I don't even want to think of the future. And what we need are people like yourselves who are evidence of once being in that place, but being able to not only see the future, but to have hope for future. And to not only see it, but to really be able to infuse and to enhance your lives as a result of and because of what you've gone through. So we need that. We need lighthouses. I call them lighthouses. I call people who represent hope a lighthouse. So thank you. What I'd like to chat about tonight is post-traumatic growth following trauma and post-adversity. And what post-traumatic growth refers to is the ability to not only be resilient and to bounce back after trauma, but also to be able to have life-changing positive psychological changes and shifts that enhance the self and our relationship with the world around us. Through the stories that we've heard tonight and through everybody's story, there's basic features, and it was so evident in listening to the three speakers tonight of kind of what I would call the seeds of post-traumatic growth. And what those seeds were that most of our speakers spoke about was incredible resilience, that each and every person had incredible resilience with the way in which they kind of processed their loss, processed their trauma, processed their grief. Resilience is the ability to bounce back. It's the ability to withstand adversity. And again, often people think that resilience has to be something huge and something absolutely visible and observable. And I always say to people, if you can wake up the morning after you have gone through your trauma, that is resilience. That we really need to applaud the tiniest acts, which are so huge, and the biggest acts. So when I speak of resilience, I speak to the triumph of the human spirit in every one of us that just has capacity to face the next day after trauma and adversity. The other common threads that ran through a lot of the stories was that of needing our grief witnessed, is that human nature needs to feel that our grief and our adversity is being witnessed. It's not in vain, that there are people witnessing our grief. Another important seed that was spoken about was connection, deep connection. Every single speaker spoke of a connection to other, a connection to self, a connection to their loved one that had passed away, a connection to the next seed being community. We cannot underestimate the importance of community, that every single speaker spoke of the connection to a community, a sense of belonging, a sense of care, a sense of being held. And I think that's what's made this last year so hard, really, is our connection has been different in that we quite disconnect right now because of COVID. And what we've had to really work with is deeper connection, that because of not being able to all go to a funeral, or go to a shiva house, or all be present for one another, we've had to work so hard at deep connection. And it's incredible how most people right now are reporting how deeply connected and contained they feel by community. An important seed that people spoke of is the need for an outlet, the need for writing, the need for an escape, is that in adversity and in trauma, we need sometimes that outlet. And often people feel, but how can I do that? How can I go to gym? How can I? And I always say, you need to, you must. You need the physical activity you do. You need that outlet. Faith is a huge seed in our ability and our capacity for post-traumatic growth. Faith is a cornerstone for many of how we find meaning in our suffering, meaning in our loss. And needless to say, there's moments where we question faith, we question why, we question suffering. But I often do feel that it's in our questioning of it that we strengthen our faith. It's our existential self that questions the meaning and the purpose in why people have to suffer. It's the same existential self that ultimately also can find meaning in that suffering. And what we really need to speak to is not finding meaning in the death or in the event or in the bad or tragic thing that happened, but more it's about finding meaning in life after our tragedy and after adversity. Another very important feature of overcoming adversity is also our connection to the person who died in the instance where it's been a loss and a bereavement. And also, most people who I speak to, and even the speakers tonight, spoke of the importance of a connection to their loved one, a connection to that person and keeping their memory and their legacy alive. That's fundamental to our overcoming adversity. Viktor Frankl speaks of tragic optimism. And I absolutely love that use of word, because what it refers to is our ability to have hope, our ability to be optimistic in spite of incredible trauma and suffering. And what I found so incredible are those two words that sit back to back, is because it's not blind optimism. We're able to acknowledge the suffering and acknowledge what's hard, but still remain hopeful and optimistic about the future. And I keep referring to Viktor Frankl because I'm a logotherapist, which means I'm trained, and that's my dialogue is in the existential meaning-based space. But I know for me, having overcome adversity as a child, it's finding meaning and being able to infuse my life with meaning has been one of the most beneficial and a necessary part of how I've come to be and do the work that I do. Other important seeds that we find in what people are speaking about is the ability also to endure grief and to endure being vulnerable. And all the speakers spoke of that, is grief is not something that we can just hop over. Grief is not something like flu that we just get over. Grief is what often is called the necessary madness. It's a part of us that is just total person. There's not a part of us that is affected by our trauma and our suffering. And what we find with that is that we have to, at the same time, be able to really endure the grief and to sit with it and sometimes own it and acknowledge it. And that's really difficult for many of us because it's a very dark and hard place to be. But the only way often out of our grief is through it. So again, thanks to the speakers that made reference to that being in that vulnerable and being in that dark place needed endurance. We need to be able to sit in that place and call for all the inner resource that we have and the external resource that we have to help us out of that place. What then is post-traumatic growth? Post-traumatic growth is a term that was coined in the 90s by two theorists. And what they said is that they studied people post-adversity. And what they found was 5 core areas of growth that people exhibited, people who had gone through really hard times and adversity. And those 5 domains or areas of growth, the first one being a greater appreciation of life and change priorities. And for any of us who have gone through adversity, witnessed adversity, we see for many that there is a change priority. There's a greater appreciation of life and of people. A second area of post-traumatic growth is what they find in people is more deeper, more intimate relationships with others. And that's a beautiful part of post-traumatic growth, is that we appreciate relationships, we appreciate people, we appreciate moments. What life also teaches us is that it's transient, it's not forever. And when we've experienced life not being a forever, we realize how important those relationships are. The third area of growth is a sense of increased personal strength. And I think in most people's story, what they'll say very often is, I never imagined surviving this. I never imagined I could do this. At that moment, as I've said already, there's that sense of, I can't imagine another day. I can't imagine my life. And what people have really come to see in themselves is incredible resilience and strength. And so often we need to help people to point that out. We need to say to a person, do you realize how courageous and brave you were by showing up at that school meeting today? Do you know how brave you were by even just going to the post office to get your car license done? It's being able to realize a great sense of personal strength. Our fourth domain of growth is an openness to new possibilities in life. And again, that's an incredible point in the trajectory of overcoming adversity, is that one is able to have a deep sense of possibility for future, a possibility for life beyond adversity. And the fifth domain that is recognized in people is that of spiritual growth. And very often you'll see that people have done a lot of work in the spiritual domain to be able to find meaning in their adversity and meaning in life after adversity. I came across a wonderful way also of looking at life and crisis and how we deal with it. And it's Seligman's 3 Ps. And I often use this. It's a quick reference for kind of our mental states and how we can review situations when we're faced with adversity. And the first P that Seligman speaks of is personalization. And I think for many of us, when we're encountering difficult times, we tend to personalize. It's a natural human condition to feel, did I do something? Is this just me? Am I the only one who's going through all these hard times? Why is my life so hard? And when we can really sit with that personalization and try and work at it and really challenge that, we come to be able to look at our situation from a different lens. The second of the P's is that of pervasiveness. And any of us who have gone through trauma or going through anything in our lives, we know how pervasive events in our lives can be. And the most important thing is to realize that what has happened, the bad thing that has happened, has affected so many areas of my life. But there's certain areas that I want them to remain, I can never say unaffected, because I think that when we've gone through adversity, there's not a part of our world that is unchanged, but we almost need to develop the ability to manage the pervasiveness of that experience. And the last, being permanent, is that nothing in life that we are in is permanent. Our speakers have spoken of moments of incredible anxiety, incredible lowness, such pain. And what we know is even in those moments, they are not permanent. And that's an important P to keep going back to. I even thought of this week and how we sat watching the news and watching what played out, the horror, the devastation, the destruction, and a feeling of, will this end? How does this end? And I know for myself, I kept going through the P. This is not permanent. This is not permanent. Even when I sit with people in great despair, we hold that space and I bear witness to that suffering. But we know that that feeling in that moment isn't permanent. And again, I really want to share these 3 Ps with you. They've been widely used across different resources and references. And I keep going back to them, that it's an amazing way of viewing life and suffering and adversity. I just want to share very briefly with you 2 other concepts that I found helpful and useful in all of this. Is I often say to people is that when we face adversity and when we face difficulty, we certainly don't choose that. It almost feels like life is happening to us. We have to cope with it, and it's nothing that we chose. We don't have control over it, but it's happened to us. But it's at that moment where we sit and we work through the pain of that trauma and adversity that we almost can take back the pencil and the pen of life and say, I didn't write the script for what's happened to me up until this point. But what I can do now is I can write the script moving forward. I am now, we cannot control events. That's still not in our hands. But what we can write the script for is what I want this to look like moving forward, what I want my life to look like, how I want to enhance my world because of and in spite of what I've gone through. We become the authors of our own story. We tell our story. We live our story. We don't choose our story, but what we can choose is the next chapter of that story. And I'm sorry to bring food into this on the night of a fast, but I said to Laurie earlier about the hole in the hole. And I'll never forget at the time of my loss, somebody using the donut analogy. And to this day, it's something that I keep thinking of, is life is like a donut. There's a hole in the middle. It's what's missing. It's what we wish we had, what we once did have, what we don't have. But what we need to acknowledge is not only the whole, but the whole is the beautiful pastry around what's missing. And in each of the narratives and the stories that we've heard tonight, each speaker spoke so beautifully of what was missing and their lives and their incredible losses. But what they also made reference to was the pastry, the blessings, the richness, their lives, the support, all of that pastry around their loss. And as we know, and somebody even said it earlier, is that life is never short of its suffering, no matter what that suffering is. Viktor Frankl likens it to a gas in a cylinder, that no matter how big or small it fills the cylinder, that we can never, ever compare suffering. But what we can look at is that in each suffering, there is great capacity for meaning. There is incredible capacity to be able to really grow around and through our losses. And I end with where I began in saying that every single one of you tonight are evidence of that. And I thank you for that. You are not evidence of anybody who's been defined by your grief and by your story, but you are evidence of and lighthouses of the triumph of the human spirit, the capacity and the ability to be able to endure life's greatest suffering, but to be able to step back into the world and really enhance our lives with meaning, with strength, with resilience, and with hope. And I think right now, more than ever, what we need is that. So thank you, Rabbi. Thank you to each of the speakers. And if you could see my desk in front of me, I've got 10,000 pieces of paper because as each of you spoke, I wrote. And besides writing tonight, I wrote for days before this. And I sat here tonight, I thought in 15 minutes, I'm not even going to make my way through half of what I'd love to say. But I really just want to leave you with a pencil in your hand and say, no matter where life has put you right now and whatever script you've lived, you've got a pencil in your hand to write that next chapter. And no matter how vulnerable we feel, it's in our ultimate vulnerability that we find such incredible strength. And again, never forget that the whole is surrounded by a beautiful pastry, that we need to acknowledge the WHOLE. And together as a community and in our collective despair that we felt this week, I really hope that we can also find collective hope. And it's in the stories that we hear tonight and in the support that people speak of that we realize how truly blessed we are to be in this community. And more than anything, and I say it again, is the triumph of the human spirit, that when we feel that we don't know how we're going to wake up the next day, we do. And we all have incredible capacity to plant those seeds of post-traumatic growth and to really live through and around our losses and our traumas and our adversity. So I thank each of you. I pray for each of you that we should just remain healthy and well and safe. And may we all just become the scripts of our story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you to all our phenomenal and spectacular speakers for just your words of strength, your courage, your bravery for attending tonight. I can't even begin to say how grateful we are. For all attendees, if anyone has any questions, they can put it in the Q&A section. You might be able to see there's a few questions. I'm going to ask the panelists, for those who we ask the questions to keep your answers short and succinct. We'd like to still end before 9 p.m. The first question is for Callie. It's a two-part question. The first part is, would it please be possible to have Gadi's Hebrew name? And the second question is, how has your experience with Gadi's birth and his consequent setback affected your relationship or faith in God?
Sure. Okay, so thank you. Gadi's Hebrew name is Gadi Doran Chaim Ben Kayla. So I'm going to be extremely honest and extremely blunt because that's what people want. At the beginning, when he was in the NICU and I was strong, I really believed that everything happens for a reason and Hashem can't give you what you can't handle. And, you know, I really held on to my faith and my belief in all of that. And as time went on, you know, through my journey, I lost faith more and more. I know that Hashem's there, and you know, even if I'm angry at him, it still means I believe. But I don't daven, I don't talk to Hashem, I don't say Tehillim, I do struggle to have that relationship. I say we're not on good talking terms right now. But through all of that, I still have my customs and I still have my traditions and things that I will always do because I am proud to be Jewish. But I have to work on my relationship with God.
Thank you. The next question is for Karen. Karen, these tips of post-traumatic growth, can they be used successfully during long-term traumas that one is still living through?
Thank you for the question. If you can personalize the tips, if they help you, I kind of work with a toolbox of things. I've always been quite eclectic in my approach. So there's a part of me that wants to say to you, if some of it resonates, if some of it feels that it's what you can use and it can help you, take it, use it. I kind of beg, borrow, and steal a lot from all different disciplines because I feel that adversity and grief it covers the whole spectrum of being human. So if any of those tips can help you in where you're at long-term with trauma, most certainly use them. Most certainly use them. And if you need to, it's always, you can look it up. It's on, look it up, understand it further. But I think that it's the seeds of just trying to not just overcome, but to become. So yeah, if it can help you, yeah.
Thank you. We're just going to give 2 minutes if anyone else wants to ask any questions. For everyone who is asking, just quickly, the recording will be made available. You can see it's being recorded live, and we will share that with you once the webinar is finished. Okay, so to start wrapping up, I just want to take this opportunity to thank every single one of our speakers for the fantastic, fantastic speeches they gave, to Brad for the courage and bravery to come tell your story, for starting your podcast. We're going to share the link. I'm going to share it now in the chat so that everyone has it. If anyone wants to start following, highly, highly recommend following The Human Element. We really thank Brad for coming on. For Laurie, for reminding us that tragedy does not define who we are, and showing us that despite tragedy, you can move forward and continue with your life and be amazing. To Callie, for showing the value of family, for showing incredible grit, incredible resilience with everything that has gone on, and for Karen for summarizing what our speakers so aptly putting it so succinctly, and for just those tips and reminders about how to overcome adversity. Finally, to Rabbi Abson for hosting, for putting this all together, and just being so supportive throughout. We are so, so grateful for you. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something and can take some courage in the fact that while things are difficult now, they will get better. For our speakers, things are better, and we look forward to seeing you, please God, very soon in person, in lighter times, where we will not only have a full redemption of a rebuilt Beit HaMikdash, but peace in the world, a stronger and more connected Jewish community, and the end of suffering for all. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have an easy and meaningful fast.
Let me just take one more question that we saw on the bottom. I would give it over to Laurie. Laurie, would you take that question?
Of course. So the question is, how do you not let your mental health affect your relationships? And I think the answer is actually incredibly simple in the sense that it's not possible for your mental health to not affect your relationships. Your mental health is who you are, and it's how you wake up every morning. I know that there were days when I physically couldn't get myself out of bed. I couldn't wake up. And then I had my poor husband next to me saying, like, you have to leave for school in 10 minutes. You have to get up. And I was angry and I was frustrated. And the people closest to you are most often the ones who bear the brunt of your mental health. As I said, my students really bore the brunt of it. My family, my husband, my friends. I think I withdrew from my friends more than anything else. I lashed out towards my husband and I snapped at my students. And I think your mental health does affect your relationships, but if you're able to acknowledge that, it's part of dealing with it and it becomes a point of conversation. So now when I'm having a particularly highly anxious moment or rather depressed episode, I'll say to my husband or I'll say to the people around me, I need you to understand that right now I'm anxious, or I need you to understand that right now I am depressed. I need you to understand that right now I'm having a hard moment and I need you to be forgiving and understanding in that moment. And the truth is the people that are closest to you, the people that love you, they get that and they will forgive you. And it's hard and it's tough and it's not possible for it not to affect your relationships. But I do think it can make your relationships stronger. I think it's without a doubt made my relationship with my husband stronger because he understands me now a little bit more. He's able to pick up on my cues, like I have certain behaviors when I'm more anxious or when I'm more depressed, and he's able to pick up on that and identify it and respond to it. So I think your mental health does affect your relationships, but I think it can be used to make them stronger as opposed to something negative all the time. I hope that answers the question a bit.
Okay,
Right.
that's a wrap. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining, everyone. We will share the recording in due time.